I'm really pleased to introduce Mary Burtzloff tonight. Mary and I have been working together for almost 20 years. We both started at the National Archives in Kansas City in 1998 at about the same time. And then I came out here in 2008, and then I think Mary came about a year later. Yeah. And Mary, in Kansas City, we had a really large genealogical element to our operation there because ancestry didn't really exist at the time, and people were still coming in for help using microfilm and that sort of thing to do their research. And Mary usually directed that part of our programs in Kansas City, so she's a very experienced genealogist. As many of you know, many of the service records, particularly the Army service records from World War II, were destroyed in fire in St. Louis in 1973. And so it can be really difficult to try to piece together your relatives' World War II history or anyone you're interested in who served in the Army at that time. But we have this wonderful body of records that Mary's going to tell you about called Army Unit Records. And those have been really useful in finding names and being able to link people to various military units during World War II. And Mary knows a lot more about it than I do, so I'll let Mary get started.
Well, thank you, Tim, for that wonderful introduction. And can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. Well, tonight I'm going to be talking about these Army unit records and ways in which you can use them or similar records to flesh out the story of the soldier that you're researching. Now, people often use the terms family historian and genealogist interchangeably. But of the two, I really prefer, I think, family historian, because I think that most of us who get into this type of research, what we really would like to know is what sorts of experiences did our ancestors have? And how did they experience the world? What sorts of things happened to them? What did they have to deal with? And these unit records can help us flesh out that aspect of a soldier's service. I'm going to talk about what I consider the two basic building blocks of military records research here. And the first one I'll go over rather quickly because we do not have service records available here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. But I do want to talk about them a little bit. It would be kind of remiss of me not to. The service record is the first building block. And if you are lucky enough to be able to get one, that will help you find that unit record and interpret the unit record in light of your soldier. The kinds of information that you find in the service record are, of course, dates of service, units, medical information, any awards or disciplinary actions, emergency contact information. For instance, you find the name of their next of kin, name and address, and so on. The second building block is what you all came here today to learn about, and that is the unit history, locations, where the unit was during World War II. You may even find maps or photographs in these records, sometimes even scrapbooks. They are archival records. We have a great many of them here, right here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library, available for research. Now, the content does vary considerably between units, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. Now, the service record, to go back to that first building block, it contains things like the service number, dates of enlistment, duty stations and assignments, training, qualifications, performance, any awards or medals, disciplinary actions, information on insurance, emergency contact data, administrative remarks. It talks about the soldier's separation or discharge from the military and other personnel actions. So essentially, it is an administrative rundown of the soldier's service. What you get out of it is a lot of specific facts about your soldier. What you don't get out of it, generally, is a good sense of what your person did in the war. I think many people, when they get that service record, they look at it and think, well, this is great, but I want to know, what was it like? What was life like? Did they ever, what sorts of battles or engagements were they in? What did they think? That type of thing. Now, I'd like to say a few words about how to order service records. They are in the custody of the National Archives at St. Louis, and World War II service records are considered archival records at this time. In the past, you had to be either the veteran or next of kin to the veteran to order these records, but that is no longer true, provided that the person separated from service before 1957. Now, you could go to, like right here, it's archives.gov/veterans, and that will get you to this page right here. You can actually order the service record online now by clicking this link. It'll walk you through it. Or you can download this standard Form 180, it's often referred to as the SF 180, and fill it out and send it in. You can also just write a letter. And just actually in the last few years, I think you have a third option, and that is actually going to the research room in St. Louis and looking at the record in person. As Tim mentioned, there is one huge problem with World War II service records. In 1973, there was a fire, a devastating fire, at the National Personnel Records Center, and it destroyed about 80% of the Army service records from World War II. Elements of these lost records can be reconstructed from other sources, but it's a slow process, time-consuming process. And even today, there are a number of National Archives employees at St. Louis whose only job is to try and salvage some of the records that were partially burned and conserve them. It's a very, very long process. Now, if your soldier's record was destroyed in this fire, some of you probably have faced that fact, there are a few options for getting information on his unit, if that's something that you don't know. If he was killed in the war, you may be able to get his unit from burial records, especially if he happened to be buried overseas or if the body was never recovered. In that case, the American Battle Monuments Commission has a wonderful website with that information. You can get the service number and also the unit and rank. Discharge papers, if the soldier survived the war, should have been filed at the county courthouse when the veteran returned. Not everyone did this, but that is a place to look. And also, some states maintain records of veterans from their state, so that there may be some records at the state level as well that you could access. And finally, there may be some Veterans Administration records that would have some information. But in order to go to the Army unit records, it's absolutely crucial that you learn what unit your soldier was in, because without that, there's no way to understand which military unit you need to be looking at. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of a service record. This is the first page of the service record for Audie Murphy, and I would guess we probably all know who Audie Murphy was, but he was generally considered the most decorated U.S. soldier in World War II, maybe the most decorated ever. He enlisted in Texas. He actually lied about his age, and his elder sister, who was his next of kin, backed him up. This document right here, I've circled that, that gives his birth date, and he was actually born in 1925, so he was 17 when he enlisted. But his sister, right down, or well, let's see, her name is around here someplace. No, I can't find it, but at any rate, she backed him up, helped him enlist. She knew how much he wanted to go into the Army.
Well, I think it's just faded.
Oh, right. Let's see. Oh, yes, that's right. It's just so faded.
Yeah.
You can't hardly see it, but their parents were both dead by this time. Let's see. Here we go. This is actually a little bit unusual for a document you'd find in service record, but Audie Murphy, as you probably know, won the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions on January 26th of 1945. And in support of that award, they took a number of statements from soldiers who were present at that time. And this is one of those statements from a rifleman, let's see, Anthony Abramsky, who was in Company B of the, let's see, the 15th Infantry Regiment on that date. And here he talks about what Audie Murphy did. Then, of course, it goes on for several pages, actually. But I'm going to get back to the events of January 26, 1945 a little bit later. Remember that Company B, 15th Infantry. We'll see what sort of records you might be able to find from the Army unit perspective on that date. Now that second building block, the second to the two I mentioned, of course, is the Army unit records. And what they give you is organizational and operational records for divisions, regiments, battalions, batteries, companies even sometimes. There's all kinds of records that can be found here. Daily logs, journals, various reports, narrative histories, all kinds of lists, and sometimes even maps or photographs. But not all of these types of records will be found for every unit. So some will have a lot more records than others, just kind of the nature of the game. And some records, of course, were lost or destroyed in the war. In some cases, I think some record keepers in particular units were a little bit better at their job or enjoyed it more or had more time. I think it's notable how the quantity of records tends to increase toward the end of the war and then passed into 1946. And I think that reflects, at least in part, the fact that the pace was slowing down for a lot of these units. Okay. Now, what do we have here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library? Well, there's about 1.3 million pages of these Army unit records. About 70 to 80% of the U.S. Army units served in World War II are represented here. And these records are mostly, but not all, duplicates of records that are also at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. We received our collection early in the 1960s. But this is one of two places in the country then that you can access these records. The quantity and type of record is going to vary a lot from unit to unit. We do have a list of the units available on the library's website, and later on I'll talk about how to access that list and search it. Now, these records do include units that served in both the European and the Pacific theaters. There's a number of different types of Army units. They're represented here. About 50% are infantry, but we also have airborne, cavalry, armor, artillery, engineer, and tank destroyer units. And I think there may be a few other more specialized ones as well, but these 7 right here are the principal types you'll find. As we deal with military records, it's always helpful to try and keep in mind the way the military was organized, because the military organization is reflected in the organization of the records that they created. And therefore, like for instance, kind of up at the top here, at the top of this chart, we have divisional records. And within each division, you have various infantry regiments. You also have other units, say reconnaissance troops, engineer combat battalion, medical battalion, and then there's field artillery battalions, various kinds of special troops. For instance, the Ordnance Light Maintenance Company, Signal Company, Quartermaster, Divisional Band, if they had one, Divisional Headquarters Company, Military Police, and so on. So there's all these types of units underneath this divisional headquarters. The broader picture records are going to be found up here at the divisional level. Then a little less broad here at the infantry regiment level. Within each regiment, you're probably going to find various battalions, and then various companies within those battalions, and then platoons generally within the companies. Typically, what you'll find in these Army unit records is either these special units that are kind of off by themselves, or regimental records, and also divisional records. Generally, you won't find units from a company itself, but the regimental records may include reports from specific companies. The company records are great because they really give you a sense of what's going on day to day, what the soldiers are facing. But you also get good information from the broader picture records. That helps you understand how your soldier's service was fitting into the larger picture of the war. So the different levels of records, they really do complement each other. From looking at these records as a family historian, you can often reconstruct the movements of the unit, sometimes at a very granular level. Often you'll find out about common tasks assigned to that unit. There may be information on their daily living conditions, some of the hardships they faced. You may learn whether they had a shortage of boots, whether they were having a problem with frostbite, if there was some disease sweeping through the company. And even in some cases, what they were doing for recreation, if they had time for that. Were they playing baseball, or did they have some kind of facilities where they could watch movies, that type of thing. You'll also find, hopefully, descriptions of engagements with the enemy. Often they are reports of casualties. These often are not very detailed. It may be that there were 3 killed in action, 11 wounded, that type of thing. Though occasionally you do get more detailed descriptions of exactly how someone came to be killed or wounded. These unit records generally do not name enlisted personnel, and that's where your information, the information that you have found about your soldiers' individual service, comes in handy. If you know when your soldier was with a particular unit, and then you can help, or you can match that time period to the unit. Okay, well, I mentioned Audie Murphy earlier. This is an example of a S3 journal from the 15th Infantry Regiment. It's talking about January 26th of 1945 in the afternoon. You can see the times, of course they're in military, 24-hour time, off to the side here. And this journal is basically recording what's going on with that regiment. Of course, this is from the headquarters perspective. It's the reports that they're getting. Now, in this section here, it mentions that one of their TDs was knocked out, and that's, I believe, the one that Murphy got on top of and used the .50 caliber machine gun to drive back the attacking Germans. But here he mentions again that there's an enemy attack, B company, which is Murphy's company, is shifted, position unknown, and so on. But this is that broader picture view of what's going on with that 15th Infantry Regiment that complements those personal accounts of what happened that day by people who were actually in on the action. Here's a different type of record from the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. And this is a portion of a patrol report, and it's not typed. They evidently, the person who did this did not have access to a typewriter, but you can see they have who and where, and then, let's see, what and when listed. And he's making an entry. It's approximately every hour, you can see. Usually there's nothing to report. It's in the afternoon, say right down here let's go to the next page, we can see this better. Okay, I love this one. One enemy, front to right, running like hell to the woods. And this is at, 4:45 in the afternoon on this date. But he's basically recording what's happening about once every hour for that unit, which was in the Netherlands at the time. This is an S2 periodic report. It's from the same outfit, and it's just a more formal report. Let's go to let's see, it talks about the enemy here at the top. Enemy activity during this period, which is, let's see, the 21st of October, I believe, 1944. And there's the times. This is what they observed going on. Enemy situation at the end of this period, and so on. And then it talks about their patrols and whatnot, what they found. This is a blow-up of that page we just saw, and as you can see here, this is in the enemy activity section. There's a mention of this Castile Dorworth, which I'm probably murdering that name, but one of the neat things about all these online resources that we have today is you can Google things and you can look things up on Google Maps. And this is Castile Dorworth. It's actually a castle in the Netherlands. It's to the east of The Hague, I think about halfway between The Hague and Germany. But what they're talking about here, it's almost like a shot list for a film. Just really tells a story here. And to actually be able to look up some of these places is really incredible to me, and see what they look like. Let's see. Okay, here is another type of document. This is a message center field log, and what you see here is essentially a list of messages going in and out. I think it's kind of interesting because you can see this back and forth. For instance, the war room is contacting the commanding officer in this unit, 15th Infantry Regiment and so on, and then at some points the commanding officer is giving orders and whatnot, but you can really see the back and forth between the regiment and I should say the 15th Infantry Regiment and the War Room and so on, and then between the 15th Infantry headquarters and the battalions, I think, under its command. You kind of see what's going on and how they're interacting with each other. And it's all, you got the times right here, so you can really get a good picture of what's happening. Okay, here's another fun thing that we run across from time to time. This is a little hand-drawn map. Actually, this is accompanying a patrol report, and there's a red patrol number 1, which is right up here, and then there is red patrol number 2. You can also see the route of that here, and then there's 1. This is a river right here. It's the Neder River in the Netherlands. And it talks about when these patrols were to leave and when they got back and so on. The scale, 1 to 25,000, the date. And this would have been used in conjunction with some larger maps of that area. That castle that we saw a picture of is right in this area up here. This is just a kind of a blow up of the map, just a little bit bigger, but that castle would have been right about here. And in fact, I showed off my kind of crappy photoshopping skills here, but I isolated the river channel and the patrol routes as best I can, and then overlaid them onto a satellite view from Google Maps. And this is what that area looks like today. Here's the river. Today there's actually 2 different channels. There's one here and then one under there. Apparently there was only this top one at that time. And if we go back to this page right here, there is a mention of this red patrol number 1 going to the 5-point road intersection and then turning around and coming back. You can't really see it on this map, but there is actually, if you blow it up further, a 5-point road intersection right about there. So this really does match up quite well with the actual satellite view. In one of those earlier reports, they also mentioned a factory, and there is apparently a boat building factory right here. It's kind of a historic site now, which I think is what they meant, and then this is that castle that they also mentioned in those records. So I think this is a really good example of how you can take some of these historical materials and kind of carefully match them up with resources that are available today, really get an idea of even what kind of terrain they were encountering and what some of the features that they would have seen, what the soldiers in that unit would have seen. Okay. Let's see. All right, now we're going to go to a different part of the world. This is a journal from the 364th Infantry Regiment, and it's describing a Japanese attack on the island of Amchitka, Alaska. This is one of the African-American units that served in World War II, and in honor of Black History Month, I wanted to make sure I highlighted at least one of those. Now, what really surprised me in looking at the records of this regiment is the date that this is happening. This is in July of 1945. So it is really close to the end of the war. And yet they are being attacked by the Japanese on this Amchitka Island, which is part of the Aleutian Island chain. It's actually closer to the mainland of Russia than to the mainland of North America. So they're way out in the kind of in the middle of nowhere. But let's see. One of the documents in the records of that regiment was this captured Japanese map. It's kind of a hand-drawn map, and of course I cannot read the writing there. I think there was these notations may well have been added by American troops, but the coastline that's shown on this map matches up to this portion of Amchitka Island. This is another view from Google satellite view, and you can kind of see the coastline depicted there. I think the planes were probably attacking, right over that area. And with further attention to the records of this regiment, you could, I think, either prove or disprove that definitively. And you can't really see it here, but under all the snow cover, it does show the old runways and everything from this American military base. They still are quite visible. And also, I think this picture gives you a good sense of how cold it must have been up there, though maybe not in July. Probably wasn't quite that bad, but. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to use the Army Unit Record Collection at the Eisenhower Library, how to get access to it, so to speak. First thing that I would recommend for everyone is understanding the overall history of the war. This comes in really handy when looking at these unit records. If you don't have to, constantly go back and check and figure out, okay, what's going on at this point in the war. And I'm not, don't have to become an expert on World War II by any means, but if you learn when the approximate time periods that certain campaigns were going on, the difficulties that we were running into in various places, then these records, they'll be more meaningful to you. You'll get more out of them as you read through them. Then your next step is to check our online index to see if your soldier's unit is represented in our collection. Once you've done that, and providing that you found that unit, you can visit or contact our staff, either through email or telephone, about ordering copies. We can make copies if you're unable to come in. Now, I suspect all of you in this room probably are able to come in and use the records, personally, which is what I would recommend, because there's something really moving about actually holding these documents in your hand, looking at the originals. But for those of you who will be viewing this online, you can always email or telephone us. Our staff can check the records and provide you a quote of what it would cost to copy them by the staff. Once you have them in front of you, you can study them, think about what they tell you, in light of what you know about the course of the war, and in light of what you know about your soldier's individual service. And you've got to analyze that information. Say if you happen to know that your soldier was wounded on a certain date, maybe from his service record or from, say, family lore that's been, you can take that and you can try and figure out what's going on, what's going on with that unit at that time. You might even find a description of the actual engagement in which your ancestor was wounded. Or you might learn, say, if your soldier became ill, you might learn that there was an epidemic of some disease that was sweeping through that company at that time. That's another type of thing you may encounter. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to find that online index on our website. This is a portion of our homepage, which is eisenhower.archives.gov. And over on the left side, there's a little tab that says Research. You can mouse over that Research tab and you choose Finding Aids. That's what we call the guides that we prepare to each of our collections. And so go to Finding Aids, and these are arranged alphabetically by the name of the collection. And this is the U.S. Army Unit Records, so it's under U. Click on U, and then you will get a page with all the collections beginning with U. Scroll on down to U.S. Army Unit Records right here. And this is a very large collection, so we have one document that's an index. That'd be the one to go to first. There's actually something over 1,500 archival boxes. It's one of our largest collections of records. Also one of the most heavily used. When you open up that index, this is the page you will see. There's some introductory information talking about what you'll find, what you won't find here. And then you will get a list with box numbers over on the left side and the names of each unit within that box over here. So for instance, say you're looking for the 17th Airborne Division. You'll find that is in boxes 2 through, I believe that's 5. Kind of at an angle here, it's a little hard for me to read some of this small print. Once you have those box numbers, you can go back to this page right here, the Finding Aids under U, and go down to, it says Book 1, boxes 1 through 100 and something there, and open that document and go over here to the container list, which is what you'll see. Under box 2, we have a list for every file. These are the file names for that particular regiment. That's, yeah, the 17th Airborne Division, excuse me, not regiment. Here we go. As you can see, we have a lot of material for this particular division, and actually goes on for several pages. Not all of these records are described at the file level like this. In some cases, all you will have will be the box numbers that the records are in, and you'll just have to look at them and see what you find for that unit. Okay. There are a few other places you might think about looking for records as well. Right here in Kansas, there is the Ike Skelton Combined Arms Research Library. This is on the Fort Leavenworth, and they do have a wonderful archival staff there and a really good archival collection, you know, focusing of course on the U.S. military, and it's surprising sometimes what they have in that library, so yeah, it might be worth contacting them. There's also the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center, which is at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. They do have an online form, I think, that you can fill out and send them a question. They also have a large collection of both printed materials and also some archival records. And then there's the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. This is one of, well, actually 3 different facilities that the National Archives has in the DC metro area. I think you've probably all seen pictures of the National Archives in downtown Washington, D.C., where the Constitution and Declaration of Independence are housed. This second facility in College Park, Maryland, was built probably about 20 years ago now to handle overflow storage when they ran out of room in the National Archives in downtown D.C. And virtually all of the World War II type records in the possession of the National Archives are at College Park. I think the exception is Coast Guard records, which I think are down in DC. But if we here at the Eisenhower Library do not have records for the unit that you are interested in, the National Archives at College Park will hopefully have those records. So that is a second place to try for these unit history records. They may also have unit history records that are not duplicated in our collection here. So if you really want to make a thorough search, contact us and also contact College Park. The National Archives at St. Louis, is where the personnel records for World War II are. As I mentioned before, a lot of them were destroyed in that 1973 fire, but this is still a place that you should try if you don't already have that service record. And then finally, you may or may not have heard of this Library of Congress Veterans History Project. This was a volunteer project. They're trying to interview as many World War II veterans about their experiences as possible. Started, I think, about maybe 12 or 15 years ago, I think. And they have many of these online. You can search, and who knows, you might get lucky. You might find someone who is in the same unit as your soldier. So that's worth checking out. And at the very least, you'll find some really interesting, usually video testimony to various soldiers' experiences in the war. And finally, don't forget local historical societies and libraries from the area of the country that your soldier lived in the area that his family lived in too, because families sometimes donate records to those local historical societies or maybe even genealogical society. And finally, you'll undoubtedly meet some people who can probably help you with your research, give you some leads perhaps that you might not have thought of. And that really concludes my presentation for tonight, but I would like to give you all some time to ask questions if any of you have any. So I also have our website up here, and then the email, and then the phone numbers, and I know that information is also on the handouts. So I'll open up for questions. All right. Say, Pam, do you want to get her the microphone, excuse me. Microphone. The lady in the
Real technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if all that you've got is their name and when they was got out of the service and where they served? Like my cousin served on the border of France and Italy on the front line.
To use these records that we've got here, you're going to have to find some place with that unit information. If you haven't already tried to get the service record, I would definitely order that, see what happens, see if you can get any good information from that. If that doesn't pan out, I would check with the county courthouse in the area where he would have returned to when he got out of the service. See if he filed his discharge with the county. You might also check with the state, probably the state adjutant general's office. See if they maintained any kind of lists of their returning veterans. Yes, local newspapers would be another source. Maybe there would have been something in the paper when he got home, or something, maybe his family would have passed on some tidbit about his service to the local newspaper at some point. If he's been passed away for a while, I'd also check his obituary. just in case.
There was nothing in the obituary.
Nothing in the obituary, okay.
Also, my uncle, he was in New Guinea,
Mhm.
but he wasn't discharged until 1947. And I
Okay.
wonder why.
Um,
And I don't,
Mhm.
he was in the Army Air Corps,
mhm.
and that's the only thing I know.
Well, certainly, they tried to get people home as quickly as they could, but they did need people beyond the end of the war, proper. They couldn't just send everyone home immediately, so that may be why he was in until 47. Typically, they had a point system, and people who had seen like the most combat and so on, generally got to go home first, and also depend on when you went in. But anyway, I hope one of those avenues I mentioned will help you find that unit, because you really need that unit to find what kind of unit records would be available.
Can you speak at all about the availability and maybe the content of non-combat unit records?
Okay, yeah. And the question was about the availability of non-combat unit records. So would this be, say like the medical detachment, something like that?
Quartermaster.
Quartermaster. Okay, yeah, we do have records from those types of units. You just have to check that index, see what we've got for the specific unit. But yes, this particular unit records collection does not discriminate between combat units and support units. Actually, one more thing, we'll get to you in just a sec, but that I didn't mention earlier is often you will find medical detachment reports, often narrative reports, in these U.S. Army unit records. Even if there's practically nothing else, there might be a medical detachment report. And even if your soldier was not in that medical detachment, those can be really good sources of information, because they generally list every place that unit was sent, and the dates. Also, sometimes you can glean facts about what they were doing, because they'll talk about what ailments or illnesses or the types of injuries that they might be seeing, the types of clothing that they're missing, that type of thing. So sometimes those non-combat unit records can be very helpful.
Yes, I was wondering, on these pages where you have listed sources of information, is it possible to make pages, my memory is not that great where I can memorize all
Oh,
of them.
yes, I believe I've got them listed on the handout. Let's see, I think on the first page there.
Okay, I was thinking there's a lot more detail that you should on the slides and.
Oh, yeah, of the previous ones, like.
Oh, all the way through, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I could, let's see, I could certainly make you a copy of this. So we can just get your name and I'll make you a copy of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh,
Thank you very much.
turn that off. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right.
I have my father's discharge papers
Mhm.
and his separation qualification record. But I
Mhm.
don't see any kind of unit number. Would it be on here?
Tim, would you mind taking a look at that and let's see if we, so I think you've got it right there, don't you? And let's see if we can figure that out for you.
That is a unit?
Yes, that's what, that's all you need.
Oh, yeah, I guess I've been talking about units all the time, and that word isn't necessarily gonna appear on the military record, but I'm talking about, depending on the level, a division or a regiment, that type of thing. Any other questions?
Mary, if you want to go back to one of those reports, there's something we can point out, I think.
Let's see. Maybe let this.
Some of those that have,
Oh, they have like right up here.
some of those that then have, well, how about like the Audie Murphy?
Okay. Let's go back to.
And if you'll see those, like enemy attack at 765-478, those are all grid coordinates. And so
Oh,
if you've
yeah.
got Army maps of those 1/25,000 scale maps,
Yeah.
that would tell you where all that action was taking place. That's something
Yeah.
else you can do to pinpoint where something happened during.
Like there's another one right there, so yeah, those would be extremely helpful in pinpointing the action.
So you have the time hacks on the left, those
Mhm.
grid coordinates, so you can just see in real time where that activity was happening as they moved.
Yes. Anyone have anything to add, or?
Is there a place, because I see a lot of abbreviations and things like that, is there a place to know what some of those stood for? I'm assuming we then KO means we knocked out one enemy tank. but-
Yeah, there are a number of online acronym dictionaries and so on. I don't know. Some of these, like CO is like commanding officer, I believe that's executive officer right there. Some of these you kind of have to think about what they might be abbreviating. I don't know that you will find every single one here, but for instance, you certainly would find BN as battalion. And like there's another example, 3rd Battalion, that type of thing. But yeah, these records are full of abbreviations. It might be helpful to kind of keep a running list if you're looking through some unit records of the abbreviations that you're seeing and what they mean. Let's see. Okay, we got one more back there. Oh yeah, Jim Layer's off there, I believe.
Yeah, Mary, I don't want to create problems for you with Jim, but I have this vague sense that during my years working
Mm-hmm.
at the Eisenhower Library, that there might be some place in the general cover material for finding aids for the unit records where there might be an acronyms list.
That's a good point. I will have to check.
I'm not saying that there is. It's a maybe. I have this sense of having seen one someplace.
I know we
That would be
have,
the most logical
Yeah.
collection that would have that.
I know we have a couple of printed volumes as well in the book collection in the research room that talk about military acronyms.
Yeah, that's right. In which case, whatever would be in a finding aid would be just fractional. Wouldn't matter much anyway. So, yeah.
But yeah, these abbreviations or acronyms, they can be challenging. And one thing I've run into a time or two is sometimes the meaning of a particular acronym has changed over the years, or rather there's some other meaning today that was not the case back then. But it's something you have to deal with kind of on a case-by-case basis. Okay, well, I think maybe we're done then.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you for coming.